Welcome to the RPG Goblin. Today we are going to be doing the second part of our Mork Borg saga, and in this part we are going to be talking about character creation and actually going through the steps of creating a character. Along with it, we will also be talking about game mechanics and actually a little bit of TTRPG theory if that interests you. But if you haven't yet, please make sure that you have listened to the previous episode of this Mork Borg saga so that you have the context of what this game is. Because that is what we cover in the first episode. We talk about what Mork Borg is, what it can do, what kind of stories it's good at telling, and even the setting for it. So make sure you listen to that first before listening to this episode. But if you've already listened to that episode, you'll be all good to start this episode. So we have Zakariah still joining us to talk about the character creation of Mork Borg. We may get sidetracked a little bit, but I swear we go through the entire process over the course of this entire episode. It was really a fantastic conversation, and I'm so excited for you to listen to it. So let's get into it. But yeah, let's get into doing like the character creation and kind of going through that. If you would like to lead how you would help someone in one of your own games make a character for Mork Borg, and I've got some dice here because I know there's a good bit of rolling. We can just kind of go through the different steps.
I think a good place to start would be to want to know if you want to do you want to make a character that is with one of the optional classes? Or do you want to build your own character from the ground up? We could learn a little bit about each of the base classes of Mork Borg. Mm-hmm. And if none of those interest you, then we could just make a new character from the ground up. Because the game lends itself to either way. Classes are technically optional in Mork Borg.
Let's do classes just to see what... Because I think, any game, pretty much you can make a character from the ground up pretty easy. And what it seems like is for Mork Borg, it's making a character from the ground up is just, purely rolling on tables and stuff like that. So let's go with the class just to see what some of the structure is.
So the classes of Mork Borg, just let me know if any of them sound particularly interesting, and then we'll just read a little bit more about them. The classes are the Fanged Deserter, the Gutterborn Scum, the Esoteric Hermit, the Wretched Royalty, Heretical Priest, or Occult Herb Master.
Occult Herb Master?
Yes.
I think that sounds great. Let's go with that. Occult Herb Master.
All right. So we're going with what is essentially the drug dealer class.
Sorry. Drug
born of the mushroom, raised in the glade, watched by the eye of the moon in a silver black pool. That is the description of the Occult Herb Master. They essentially have a bunch of poisons and elixirs and stuff that they get off of a random table, and so you have some buff potions, which is just the joke of, oh yeah, you're the drug dealer of the party, or you're carrying poisons or other stuff. So if you're playing as the Occult Herb Master, you're going to start off with rolling some stats first. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. They generally start off with randomizing your equipment and then your weapon and stuff and then rolling abilities, but let's roll abilities first.
Sounds good.
For your toughness, because every class has certain special things that happen to their abilities, and then we'll do the regular ones afterwards. So let's do tough as wood. Roll 3d6 plus 2 for toughness.
All right, exciting. And again, rolling stats, super easy. You just either need 1d6 and you roll it several times, or you just have a few dice, which, I have many of those. So it is plus what?
Plus 2.
Okay, so I got a 5, 2, and 2, so that is 11, correct? That would be
yes.
massive.
Yes, what?
So yeah, 9 plus 2. Yep, that should be 11.
Yes, that is 11. And 11 is a 0. So you can just put
Ooh.
0 as your toughness.
All right. Not very tough. Or standardly tough.
Standard. It's actually really common in Mork Borg to have zeros in a lot of things. The 0 range is pretty wide, so like the average is going to be 0. Like,
okay, that makes a lot of
it's
sense.
average. So the average of this game is 0.
Not very tough.
So low in protein, roll 3d6 minus 2 for strength.
Low in protein. All right. 13. And then
13.
minus 2, so that's another 11.
Another 11, so that's a 0. So we'll do a 0 in strength.
All right.
And then for we're gonna do for presence and agility, those are each just standard, so that's just gonna be 3d6.
All right. So starting with presence, I guess. That is a 17, actually. Almost an 18.
17. Oh my gosh. That is the highest roll I've ever seen in Mork Borg. No, that is a +3.
Oh, hell yeah.
That is as good as it gets.
Apparently, I have a lot of presence. I'm very present.
Well,
in the world.
that's you're aware. So, and then 3d6 for agility as well.
All right, agility. And that is a 14.
That is a +1.
Hey.
Yeah, actually really good stats. Most Mork Borg characters have like either like -1s, or you don't have a minus, do you?
I do not know.
Most Mork Borg characters have at least one negative. Yeah, like at least a negative something. So no, that's actually a really well-rounded character. So
Nice.
your tough your hit points are going to equal your toughness plus 1d6.
Plus 1d6. All right.
Yep.
So pretty much whatever I roll on d6 because I have a 0.
Yep.
I got a 6.
Oh my gosh, you're on fire. Yeah, no, that's a lot of hit points for Mork Borg character.
Yeah, it seems. I guess the most that you could have is 9 if you're really, really lucky. But yeah, no, that's crazy. Especially because at the beginning you were like, yeah, you could have like 2 hit points.
I've had several characters that have been in my games that have had like 2 hit points. I think there was one character that had 1. Like it is. I mean, it's fine. It's fine. You have 2 hit points, you'll be fine. The only problem is one of the characters with 2 hit points was essentially like they were like the esoteric hermit, which is kind of like more of like a wizard type of character. And so they don't have any armor. So being an unarmored character with 2 hit points in Mork Borg was really tough, and I think they were knocked to 0 hit points a couple of times, and got very, very lucky.
Yeah.
Because getting knocked to 0 puts you in a condition called broken, and you basically roll a d4, and one of the things that happens is, I think if you roll it's either a 1 or a 4, but if you roll on the broken table, there's a 1 in 4 chance that you die. So like you're, and then I think another one gives you like a lingering injury. Like getting knocked to 0 hit points isn't good, but I mean, obviously it's preferable to death, but it happens a lot more than you would think. Like being broken and roll. Oh yeah, so it's if you roll a 4 on the broken table, which is 1 through 4, you're dead. If you roll a 1, then you're just unconscious for d4 rounds. So you would be unconscious for maybe 1 round or maybe 4 rounds. If you roll a 3 on that table, then you would die in d2 hours unless you get like treatment. Like unless you like go to a doctor and get treatment. And all of your like die rolls are now like DR is what they use in Mork Borg instead of DC. And so it's a DR 16 to do literally anything. So like being broken sucks, but also it's the alternative to being dead.
Yeah, I mean it's nice not to die.
All right, so you have So you have 6 hit points.
Mhm.
Let's also get your silver out of the way. So your starting money, all money in Mork Borg is silver. There's just silver. There isn't like different money types. So it's going to be 2d6 times 10 silver.
All right. So that is a 4. So that would be 40.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, you have
Very
40
nice.
silver, which is a good chunk of money. So let's see. For the occult herb master, you're going to roll on a weapons table. So let me flip over to the weapons table. There's a weapons table on page 20 and 21 of the Mork Borg book. And it is essentially a bunch of weapons stabbing into some guy.
It is one of my favorite pages.
And that is the weapons table. So you are going to roll a d6 on the weapons table, and that'll be your starting weapon.
Sounds good. All right, let's see what we get because I know femur is an option, and that's
That is a 1 if you're hoping to just hit people with a femur.
that is a 3.
A 3 is a short sword.
Ooh, very
So you can
nice.
put that as your weapon. You have a short sword, and a short sword does a d4 of damage.
The the like the dice that are assigned to the weapons are relatively low. Is that the same thing for like the monsters?
The monsters generally roll smaller dice as well. A good example would be like a goblin, right? Like your goblin, Mork Borg goblins are cursed. If you
Yeah, I saw
actually,
that when I was looking through.
they're these awful like emaciated like shark. They have like a goblin shark's head, and they're
Yeah,
like
it's a little
they have like
upsetting.
this really like thin and like their skin is stretched over their body. Like they look super gross. But they do a d4 of damage with their knife or their short bow. So like the
Mm.
numbers are all smaller. But you have 6 hit points, so you know.
I'll be fine.
Yeah, the numbers being smaller doesn't really change the game other than the
Mhm.
math of it.
Yeah,
Math
and
is
I think
easier.
that just what it makes it easier that way with making it smaller numbers. So
Yeah,
I
there's also something to be said for like the tension of the game because it feels more tense when you have 6 hit points rather than 60 hit points.
Mhm.
But functionally, it's the same, right? Because like if you're playing a game with big numbers, the monsters are doing potentially like 60 damage in a hit, and you have 60 hit points. It's like it's no different than a monster doing 6 damage and you have 6 hit points.
It's just the
Because like
scaling.
yeah, it's like the numbers change, like the scale of the numbers change, but functionally if your game scales, if your monsters scale with your players, it all ends up being kind of the same anyway. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
I
it kind
love
of
that.
balances out. Um, yeah, so that is your weapon. You roll a d2 on the armor table. So
Oh,
you
give
do
me one moment
potentially
to
have
grab
armor.
one actually.
What? I get to use my d2.
Actually, hold on. I don't think I have one out. I'm a dice maker. I have dice everywhere. And yeah, I can't find one. Hold up. I have just a little bowl of unfinished dice. I'll grab one from that. All right. D2 has been grabbed. All right. We'll
Let's
just
see.
assign the mushroom as a 2. 2 or no, 1. Never mind.
Oh, it's a
I
1?
couldn't see it.
A 1
Yeah.
is tier 0. You have no armor.
No, I am squishy.
Yep, no armor. To be fair, the best you could have done was light armor, which reduces D2 of damage. But you can buy that for 20 silver. So, like, if that was
Mhm.
something you were concerned about, you could get some, like, padded or leather armor. Armor in
Yeah, that's
Merkborg
magic that
is
they buy
yeah.
things.
Yeah, armor in Merkborg is separated into tiers. The tiers are 1 through 4. Tier 1, sorry, they're 0 through 3, but yeah. So it's the 0th tier is no armor, then tier 1 is light armor, which would be any like fur or padded or like leather armor.
Mhm.
And that minus is a D2 of damage. There's medium armor, which is tier 2. That would be like scale or like chainmail or something like that. That would minus a D4. But it also gives you a penalty on agility tests of +2. And then, sorry, no, it doesn't give you sorry, the other way around. It gives you a buff. It gives you a buff to agility.
I was gonna say,
sorry.
a plus.
Sorry, it gives you.
Plus.
It gives you a buff to your like defense rolls. So it gives
that's
you a
cool.
buff. It gives you a buff to your defense rolls, and it minuses a D4. And then a heavy armor gives you, a defense DR is +2. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, like they affect your dice rolls for your agility tests and your defense rolls.
Yeah, that's cool. How do you what's
Sorry,
your
yeah.
opinion?
Like my bad.
You're
I want to
okay.
get this right. I want to get this right. So it's sorry. The DR on the tests are increased, so it is harder to be agile when you're wearing heavy armor, but
Okay.
your defense is higher. So when you're
Okay,
doing a
that makes
defense
sense.
roll for heavy armor, your defense gets a +2, but when you're making like an agility test to like avoid something, you're worse at that.
Okay.
But you also minus damage, so like it makes more sense when you're playing it. But
So, when it comes to actually like hitting things, do the monsters roll to hit you, or is it just it hits you?
this is the best thing. I'm so glad you brought it up. For me, as the person running the game, I don't roll to hit. Player characters roll to defend themselves. So
Oh, that's
essentially,
yes.
yeah, when there is a fight with a goblin, I say the goblin attacks you, roll defense, and then you roll and see if the goblin actually hit you. The standard roll is going to be a 12, so it would be a DR 12 for most monsters, and you would roll an agility test basically to defend yourself.
Okay.
So, like, you are rolling agility, DR 12 to defend yourself from most things. There are some monsters that specify that, like the goblin does, I believe it says that it's especially quick. So, it's actually a DR 14 to avoid being struck by a goblin. But that aside, most of the time you're rolling a DR 12 for defense, and then you're rolling a DR 12 to attack monsters as well, because monsters don't have a different AC unless they specify specific to that monster that DRs for attacking it are this.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So the standard, so there's just like a standard like boilerplate is that it's DR 12 to attack, it's DR 12 to defend, unless we're changing that with a specific rule.
And it makes it, I guess it feels a bit more, it feels more action packed, the fact that you have to roll to defend versus just seeing if something else hits.
I'm gonna be honest, I have ported this into my 5e games. I don't roll for monsters to attack. I actually like flipped it around. So I'm like, you guys can just roll to defend and I'll just have like a DC. It's the same math. I just flip it around because I got so used to in Mork Borg being able to like monitor multiple monsters at one time because it's a load off of me to have to like roll dice. Like I get to roll more dice than anybody in general, right? Like as the person running the game. So I'm like, I am fine offloading some of my rolling onto the players because they came here to roll dice and play a game.
It gives them more to do.
Yeah, it's like, and it's more to do. It's things to do when it's not their turn, right? Like that also adds to this feeling of like pace of your game, right? Because like if I'm like, okay, the monster has 3 attacks. It attacks you, and you. Roll defense. Everybody can roll at the same time. As opposed to me having to roll 3 different rolls or rolling 3d20s and then looking at that and adding that up, I am now offloading that work onto the players and they get to play the game.
I may have to talk after we're done doing this. I may have to talk to you about that more because that sounds insanely cool, and I just want to know how it works even more.
Yeah,
We'll
a
need
lot.
to talk.
It is like, yeah, definitely. I love it. That is one of the things that is built into Mork Borg that I'm like, this is fantastic game design. As the game master, you are going to roll more dice than your players most of the time, just because of the nature of the game, right? Like in the running of the game, if you have all your monsters, if your monsters have to roll like saving throws or whatever, or there's like a percentage chance that something happens, you're also keeping track of a lot of things most of the time. You're keeping track of what's happening in the rest of your dungeon, of all of your monsters, NPC names. Like there's so much stuff that you need to do. And I'm like, I can offload a little bit of math onto the players and they get to do what we all love to do, which is roll more dice. Right? Like, so yes, you will be rolling to defend in Mork Borg in every single fight multiple times. The GM rolls damage for the monsters, but they don't roll to hit.
Perfect. Oh, that's awesome. Oh man, I love that so
also
much.
as the game master, you also will roll like any armor or resistance that the monster has. So like if they're wearing armor, you will be rolling the D4 or whatever to reduce incoming damage. So it's not that you don't get to roll any dice, it's just you offload some of the rolling to your players who are otherwise just sitting there waiting for their turn.
Absolutely. And I just love the mechanic because I believe this is in Into the Odd / Electric Bastion land, where instead of the armor just being like the DC, it is you take it away from whatever damage you're getting, which I think makes it makes armor feel more meaningful in my opinion. You can actively see it work.
Yeah, there's something about that, and I was actually this goes back into the history of tabletop gaming and why is armor class the way that it is. This also lends itself back to what I was talking about earlier about like Mork Borg getting rid of some multi-generational cruft that has just built up and become tradition. Armor class comes from Dungeons and Dragons, and it comes from a tradition of tournament play. Where like if you look at like the old box sets of D&D, they had like a certain number of players and up, but it wasn't uncommon for D&D parties at conventions to be like 10 players. So like if you have a 10-person party going into this dungeon, like you need the game to move, right? Like you can't be spending any time doing like a ton of big math and whatever, right? So like we can't be having them like roll to reduce damage on every single hit against your players because you need to keep the game moving. And so armor class is a solution to that problem of tournament play. But most people don't play that way in their home games. Like people play with like a handful of people, maybe like 5. That's a pretty big party, I think. Yeah. I think that's a large size party is like 5.
I say like 3
people.
to 5 people.
Yeah, because like I mean, standard. I have currently like I have like 3 regular players. I've done like 4 for a few long-term campaigns. But having like 10 people is a lot, and most people don't play that way. In my experience, at least. Maybe I'm wrong about that. There's people having big D&D parties. But you can afford to take the time to roll defense and like roll damage reduction and stuff, and it gives more things for your players to do to keep them engaged. I think that we can afford that time in a modern game with, the number of players that we're typically working with. Also, I think as long as you trust your players to be honest, you can let them do a lot of that math themselves, right? Like you don't have to monitor your players and be like, oh, are they in fact writing down the right number of damage? Which I think that there's almost like this tradition of like antagonistic game mastering that lends itself to like a tournament play type of scenario where it's like you versus the dungeon master, which modern tabletop games don't encourage. Like we encourage people to just be honest and play the game honestly. So I think that we can afford to roll for defense, and being a system that's actually built for that, like built around that, like that's a huge part of the survivability of Mork Borg characters, is that they reduce incoming damage. Like you could not survive with low hit points and no damage reduction. And even with your amazing 6 hit points, like it isn't going to be unusual for somebody to want to get armor and to make that like their primary objective. It's like
it's helpful.
Yeah, armor keeps me from dying. There are few
Chance to at
downsides
least.
to armor.
Oh.
Oh, there are very few downsides to armor.
Oh, okay. I thought you did. You said there were. I'm like, oh.
There is a restriction against like using powers, which is spell casting. If you're wearing like I think it's medium or heavy armor, that you can't do that if you're wearing. Yeah, scrolls won't work when wielding two-handed weapons or medium or heavy armor. So like if you're, but that means light armor. There is literally no downside. Like
Yeah.
you should just have some armor. Another thing is like there are
Worth it.
another thing on the armor table that isn't like on the table itself but is below it is shields. And the way that
Oh, yeah.
shields work is that they just reduce 1 damage flat, like off of every hit.
Which is helpful.
Yeah, so like if you have a shield and light armor, you're reducing from 2 to 3 damage every time you get hit.
And I also noticed, because I actually saw that part, because I was looking at some of the intro stuff to the character creation, so like the weapon table and some of the armor. And I saw that for shields, actually, you can decide to have the shield take the full brunt of an attack if you let the shield break.
Yeah, that
I
is
think that's
one of
awesome.
that is such a cool, like, responsive design to combat.
Mhm.
Because if you think about it, that means that any player that has a shield has hold on, Alexa's yelling at me.
All good.
Sorry. So what I was saying was, before Alexa started reminding me of things, was that it's really good responsive design, because if you're a player that is playing with a shield, you at all times have a get out of jail free card and have to be engaged with the way that you're being attacked and how much damage that attack is going to do.
Absolutely.
Because it's like dragon breath hits me, maybe this is a time to break my shield.
Maybe this is worth it.
Yeah,
and it also makes you look out for those moments, like, because this game is so cutthroat, like, gotta be careful.
Yeah, and it also it's a 20 silver investment in potentially your life. So like the game does incentivize you to go like sword and board, to have a shield and wear armor and like do things that intuitively, like, people who start playing tabletop RPGs kind of feel like this is how it should work. You know, like trying to explain armor class to new players is always a bit of a challenge of abstraction, right? Like, how do you explain what is happening when you get hit by an attack when the attack does no damage? Well, when the attack like when the attack misses, but it misses because of your armor. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Did I dodge it, or did it
strange.
ping off of my armor? Like, yeah, it's super weird. Like, are people just missing each other all the time, or are they actually getting hit and it just doesn't do anything? Like, we have to end up like doing this very strange thing narratively where we're like, the dragon like missed you, or you say the dragon's claws pinged off of your armor, but that is a little bit more of a mental load to do some kind of conversion than just saying what is happening in the game. Like, the monster hit you, but you absorbed all of the damage of its attack with your armor.
It makes it sound so much cooler. Like, it makes armor feel like something that is worth it, other than just a number on your character sheet.
Yeah, it's like, I understand and I value the tradition of AC, but boy, do I like this so much more. And having tried to, and I've tried so many times to make an armor system for like D&D 5e that would emulate this, it does not work. There are too many things. That's one of those things where like the system, you can't adjust armor class in 5e without adjusting a ton of things that are connected to it. Like, everything is connected in that regard. So like, you would end up with this rule set of like, I want this to be like fast and a simple rule set, maybe to mod my game, but you end up with something that is pages long with a bunch of edge cases and niche things to remember.
Yeah, that's where you just come down to playing a system that works for you, works for the type of
Exactly.
game that you want to play.
That is the biggest case for like you should switch systems if that is something that is bothering you. You can switch to a system that functions that way, and Merkborg functions intuitively as far as armor functioning as damage reduction.
Hmm.
Like yeah, you might get hit a little bit more for wearing armor, but you're going to reduce the damage by so much that, and potentially to zero a good chunk of the time. Like it will
Also,
just
it's
keep
okay
you
getting
alive.
like I always find it fun to get attacked in games because
Yeah,
that means something's happening.
yeah. It gives me something going on. This is a very good game for people who are easily bored.
Mhm.
Like if you get tired of waiting for your turn, because you have one action, because there's also like there aren't bonus actions and a bunch of other things. So you have like one action. And everything basically does. Like monsters too, they more or less have one thing that they do.
Mhm.
Unless, of course, asterisk it says otherwise of like this monster attacks two things. But in general, everything has one action, so the rounds just go so fast. It's like everybody gets a
Absolutely.
turn in like 5 minutes. Let's go.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that's actually perfect because recently I'm right now running some encounters in my personal game of D&D, and we just like finished a long, like pretty long fight that took pretty much the whole session, which
mhm.
oh, like, fights taking entire sessions is something that can sometimes be fun if it's interesting enough. Other times it can
Yeah.
be incredibly taxing.
Yeah, you
And
don't want it to drag, and sometimes,
yeah,
especially in higher level games, I don't know what level your game is at, but especially in higher level games, some combats just take so long because
absolutely.
everybody has so many options for every turn. Where it's like, I mean, there is a benefit to like playing a lower tier type of game in when
Mhm.
talking about like the tiers of game. And Merkborg cements itself firmly in like a tier 1 scenario where like the numbers are small, the number of actions are low, but that does mean that the game functionally moves faster.
Mhm.
um but yeah, sorry, I got so diverted from actually building this character.
Oh no,
uh,
you're great. We need to do like maybe something that's like talking about combat in games or like history of TTRPGs because this is great. I am
yeah,
learning so much and I'm enjoying this.
I really like this hobby, and so I've listened to so many hours of like history of these games and where things come from, because you can learn a lot about like game design from looking at what elements are what elements are in the game and why were they put there? Like just
Mhm.
questioning, why do we do it this way? It's like, why do we have 6 stats? Why do we have armor class? Like there are reasons for all of this, and they're usually pretty good explanations of why. But my question then is, do we still need those in a modern RPG? And I would argue a lot of these things are tradition, but they're not necessary. And if you were building a new game, you wouldn't build it that way.
Mhm.
Like and Merkborg has been out of a host of games, and I have a ton of games on my shelf. It is a game that very much is built with that benefit of hindsight that I mentioned earlier. Like it has an acknowledgement of what game design works for it. Like it is like we're doing a new thing. We're using 4 stats instead of 6. We're using armor that reduces damage instead of armor class. We're rolling to defend instead of rolling monsters to attack. And it just makes this very fluid gameplay that works within itself, because it isn't burdened by all of these like traditions that may not have worked for the game if they were to include them.
Absolutely. Yeah, they changed they went at it with a completely different idea to make the game actually work for the idea that they wanted versus
Yeah.
just leaning back into traditions or trying to go with even a different like they invented their own system and mechanics and how it all works to service the exact idea the game is versus
Yeah.
trying to change and fit something into a box.
Yeah, absolutely. They didn't have a list of requirements that they have to fulfill in order to make it feel like D&D or whatever. Like they're just like, we're going to make this feel like Mork Borg, and that's what it's going to feel like, and it's going to work like that.
Oh, I love that.
And
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, you have a character. Uh, you carry a portable laboratory and continually search for frequent expended ingredients. Daily, you have the materials to create 2 randomly determined decoctions and can brew a total of D4 doses. So I would say this would go somewhere in your like equipment. You would just put like portable laboratory, portable lab, and then you can brew D4 doses.
That's so cool.
And if you don't use these decoctions, they lose their vitality after 24 hours. So you have kind of this ongoing cycle of random nonsense that you're just going to have with you. And that's on a table that's on page 56 of the book. I don't want to like go through having you write down all of them, obviously, but like essentially you're going to have either like red poison, which potentially does it's a DR12 toughness check or minus D10 hit points.
Ooh.
So that's like an instant kill if you like poison somebody with this. Azuniel's Vapor, which pass a DR14 test or severe and arguably fun hallucinations for D4 hours.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and then there's like a few others on there. There's like an Elixir Vitalis, which heals a D6 of hit points and stops infection. It can be habit forming. That's all it says. Yeah, and then there's like Spider Owl Soup, where you can see in darkness and climb on walls for 30 minutes. There's a few others
gives you
there.
Just fun things.
Yeah, it just gives you a handful of things that are going to be randomly determined whether you have them or not. But yeah, that first one I do want to talk about because the red poison of like being a toughness check or minus D10 hit points. Like that is the sort of thing that can instantly end an encounter, right? Or like instantly kill somebody, which is something that gives your characters power in a very like real and visceral sense that doesn't require a large set of rules or abilities in order to feel powerful, because you carry with you the ability to kill something. Anything potentially, however you determine to use it. Now, the nature of the red poison is vague, and you could ask your GM, is this like a poison? Can I like poison somebody's beverage and give it to them? Or is this like a contact poison?
Yeah.
The game doesn't say. And essentially that is up to your GM. Like in that moment to keep the game moving, the rules are light. So your GM is going to need to make a call in that moment of like, is red poison something that you can put on your weapon and then stab something with? Or is this something that is like ingested or something like that, right? Like you can determine that table by table. I would say a good rule of thumb in that scenario is if you want it to be a consistent thing, then write down your note for how you, as a group, interpret this poison to be. But I would say for the design of the game, there is nothing in the design of the game that would discourage you from letting your players use this thing that might ruin your encounter. Because the game is built upon ruined encounters. Your player characters are potentially fragile. Like right now, if a monster like bites you or stabs you or something, like let's flip over to a random monster. In the back of the book, they have a little bestiary with monsters. So like if you are being attacked by a Thynx, which is like this gargoyle, a Thynx grotesque, which it does a d6. It can do a d6 of damage that always hits. So like there's no defense roll. It's just if you roll a 1 or a 2 on a d6, like it just does damage or whatever. Like there are monsters. I think I read that one wrong, but there are monsters that can do damage to you, right? And they could do a d6 of damage, and like you don't have armor, that could kill you, right? So
Yeah,
like,
instantly.
you are instantly dead if a monster does a d8 of damage. That thing is going to kill a lot of player characters potentially, but also you could instantly end this encounter like at the start and be like, I am going to try to poison this thing, and I'm going to I'm going to feed myself to the troll with this vial of poison, dying, but also reducing their health by 10.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh man, it just the combats in this game just sound so freaking open to creativity. Just like what you can do, because just that, like, feed yourself to the troll and have the poison on you. An easy solution. I mean, easy, you die, but like
you die, but you die hero? I don't know. You're probably a terrible person. But you did a good thing.
just it's so interesting the ways that you can approach, and it's interesting because they almost just give you enough things that you can do. Like they just give you like the poison or the dagger that can like instantly kill and all of that. Like they give you just enough that you feel like you have the power even if things are completely stacked against you. That's so cool.
Well, also, how many encounters are you going to go through, right? Like, if you're in a dungeon and you have like 8 encounters to get through, you can instantly end one of them, right? Like, and so you're just going to have to hold off potentially of like, is this the one where I go for it? Is this the one where I try and use this? But what if you try and use it and it doesn't work, or your weapon that you put this poison on gets taken away from you? Like, there are things that can happen that could instantly make this instant win into a failure, but that's so determined by what is happening in the game, and so there isn't like a predictable outcome, which is super fun.
Play to find out.
Yeah, play to find out. Yeah, so that is, I think that's the gist of the Occult Herb Master, except for where you were probably raised, which is a table. So roll a d8, and we'll determine where you, the Occult Herb Master, were raised.
That's a 1.
That is a 1. So you were probably raised in calm isolation in the Sarkarsh Dark.
Ooh.
So there are locations in Mork Borg, and this is a good transition to that. The map of the world of Mork Borg is a kind of amorphous world where the distances between locations change, and it's almost got this dreamlike feel to it as the inevitable end is on its way. The world itself being inconsistent is a feature of the world. So like traveling from Galgenbeck to the Thrift across these like big land bridges that are there, that could take you a day. It could take you 40. There is no way to know other than to try to get there, and you probably won't make it. Or you might make it fine. We don't know. But it creates this there's this sense of like you're moving forward without a sense of where things will end. And it does leave your GM open to change things like that to suit the fun of the game. Is the game about you reaching Galgenbeck? Is that what the game is about? In which case, traveling from Graventosk. Also, the names are all just awesome, by the way. But traveling from Graventosk to Galgenbeck is the objective of the game. How long that travel will be isn't written in the book. And if you've traveled from Graventosk to Galgenbeck, traveling back might take you much longer. It does free you up from the burden of consistency. Which is something that is taxing on your GM to keep your world super consistent. Mork Borg actively is discouraging. There are certain names and staples of things, but there aren't a ton of details about each of these places, allowing you as the GM to kind of make up and fill in the rest. Because, as you said, Mork Borg is a vibe. So, like, it does give you this, like, it does give you the vibe of each of these places without a ton of consistent information. But you don't have to be consistent either. And from your game can decide if once you establish things, you want to keep them that way. And then you have a part in the way that the world is shaped as you play. Because, what do we know about the Western Kingdom? I don't know. How are things going there? Are one of your characters from there? Your characters could describe things about the place that they came from, and that you might just let that be and just hang on to it, because like there's not enough consistent information about the world other than it's terrible. So
that's really...
That is the main through line, is that you shouldn't have had like a good time. You didn't turn out the way you didn't turn out the way you turned out because everything was okay. Yeah, there are those features to the game. If you were going to be playing in a game, this is where I would say like go to the equipment table, like buy some equipment, spend your silver, start off the game poor, because that's generally more fun anyway. Having a lot of money isn't actually that fun in a tabletop game. Let's be real. It's more fun to be broke and need money than it is to have all the money.
It gives new things to do, go on a quest, go get some money.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you can carry strength plus 8 normal-sized items. Normal-sized being determined largely by just what makes sense that you can carry. Another couple of things that I would love to mention is, like, if you're playing the game, when initiative starts, rolling initiative is a d6, and it's basically a 50-50 shot. A 1 through a 3 means that the enemies go first, and a 4 through 6 means that your player characters go first, and it's side initiative.
Oh my god, that's just so much simpler.
It's side initiative, and it's so fast because the pace of the game is built out of like rounds and rounds and rounds. This is actually another thing that I've ported into my 5e game with no regrets, is side initiative. Because going side by side, there is the worry about like, oh, well, what if my players get laid out by the monster's multi-attacks, or what if my players just steamroll by going Nova? It's like, well,
that's what happened.
I haven't had that be that big of an issue in general. I think that the fear of that vastly outweighs the times that sort of thing has happened. I can think of a few times that my players have steamrolled an encounter with initiative that is normal, right? Like, I can think of that happening normally. Like, that is not stopped by initiative order. I don't believe that. And after having played probably close to 1,000 hours of side initiative at this point, I have no regrets, and that was triggered by playing Mork Borg, because
that's amazing.
Because Mork Borg's like side initiative was so intuitive. There's no asking who goes next; it's whoever's ready to go. You can have people collaborate on what happens in what order. If they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go attack it," and it's like, "No, wait, I'm gonna try my instant murder maneuver and see if this works out." And if it fails, then go ahead and attack. But like, we're gonna try this first.
I think it brings everyone back into the game too, because you're not, because when initiative's going normally, like you're paying attention on other people's turns, but like you can't really do anything or anything like that. It actually makes you listen to what other people are doing and work together. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's also like, what if one of your characters, like you have your potion of hit points or whatever, you have your elixir of health, elixir vitalis or whatever it was, and you're like, well, my dude is about to die. Like, before that happens, I'm gonna give you a potion before you run in towards the monster. Yeah. And we can decide the order that things happen or combo things together in that way. And same for the enemies. Like, the enemies have the benefit of all going at once, which means that working together, which also means that you as the GM don't have to keep track of who goes next. You know who goes next. It's the people who haven't gone yet, and that's it. So that is super cool. I'm a big fan of side initiative. Big fan of that being triggered by Mork Borg.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. You can do individual initiative in Mork Borg. Like you can do like agility plus a d6, but just determine who goes first. Just ask. Just be like, I'm going next. You know, you don't have to keep track of that. Other things is, as I said, like everything is like a DR12. So like if you wanted to attack something, that's a DR12 strength. If you wanted to make a ranged attack, that's DR12 presence. If it is defense rolls, those are DR12 agility tests. There's critical hits. There are crits. If you roll a natural 20 on an attack roll, you do double damage, and the enemy's armor is reduced by 1 tier. Ooh. So basically, it takes those armor tiers of like, oh, this enemy has is reducing a d6 of damage every time we hit it. Well, if you get a crit, it now only reduces a d4, or so on. So that's a critical hit. And then if you get a crit on a defense roll, you can then make an attack against that enemy.
Oh, hell yeah.
So like the goblin tries to attack you and you get a nat 20 on your defense, you now get to do like a riposte and hit it back. There is a fumble. There are fumbles on nat 1s because this is a Grimdark game and you don't want your characters to do too well. So nat 1s are punishing. A nat 1 on an attack roll breaks your weapon. It's one of those games.
But at least it makes sense for this. Like it feels like everything would be like not the best quality, and like you're just like femur's a weapon. Like yes. We know what's going on.
Yeah. Also, like once your weapon breaks, just like pick up somebody else's weapon. Like I don't know, steal their weapon. Try to steal their weapon. Do something. If you roll a nat 1 on a defense roll, then the damage against you is doubled and your armor is reduced by 1 tier. It's kind of just the inverse of the crit, right? If your armor is reduced below tier 1, then it's just ruined and you have to repair your armor or whatever by going somewhere.
Yeah, that's also cool. Oh man, I love this game.
I think there's what are other things? How long is a round? A round is kind of 6 seconds. Although like the distances of things in Mork Borg, they keep it vague. They're like there are typically 10 rounds in a minute, but the exact number of time in a turn is enough time to make one attack or use a power or something. Like absolutely. You just get to do one thing and then that's your turn. And there's enough time in a round for everyone to take their turn.
Perfect.
Rests are a big part of this about the pace of Mork Borg. If you stop and take a breath, like you take a breather, have a drink, like you take a minute, that's a d4 of hit points back. Short rests are really short. It's just like, I just need to take a break for a minute. It's not an hour long. It's like a coffee break. Like take like 5 minutes, get a d4 of hit points back. If you get a full night's sleep, you get a d6 of hit points back. But you also have to have like food or drink. Otherwise you just don't recover hit points. And you lose like a d4 of hit points to starvation. So you could have a starvation motivated Mork Borg game. Where it's like,
that's cool though.
You're gonna die. You're gonna lose hit points every day that you don't have food. So you need to go find some food or kill something and eat it because that's like otherwise you're gonna die. There's also a condition like called infected that comes up periodically, which is essentially like you can't benefit from resting and you lose like a d6 of hit points. That's something that could be like solved by your elixir or something. You'd be like, this potent elixir shall heal your infection to your wound or whatever.
It's so cool. Like I don't know, I'm just kind of blown away right now by just the game design itself and how much it just gives to actually the idea behind the game.
Yeah, they super focused in on like making it fit together, making it fast, keeping it light. There are tables for like monster reactions when they encounter you. So like you roll like 2d6 and it determines if like this monster is like a hostile monster or a friendly monster.
Oh, that's cool.
So you can do that and kind of just have like a hex crawl type of scenario where you're like, I go here, you encountered this. It is angry and it doesn't like you, or it is indifferent to your existence.
It seems like there's a lot of wiggle room on what kind of scenarios that you can run for this game.
Yeah, for sure. Like you can have like you can on the fly. It's a very good game for, again, like last minute, like I need to generate things on the fly, because you can have things just kind of happen and it kind of works. Because it's like, oh, I encounter a wickhead, which are like these monster people ish. I don't know if they're monsters or not, but they could be hostile, but they're essentially like people with like a lantern for a head. And they could be hostile, or they could be like, merchants that are like wandering around helping you out. And so like determining whether this wickhead is hostile or not is going to be like determined by either a die roll, or you could determine it on the fly if you wanted to like have a moment of like, okay, here's a guy who can, patch up your armor or whatever. There's also, on every single monster, they have two things that I think is super cool, and it does change the vibe of the game a little bit, is that they have morale is a feature of every single monster.
Yes.
So if the monster is at like a third of its hit points, it'll roll morale, and you'll see if it tries to run away or not. Also, on every monster is loot, like things that you can do to get money off of this. Like you can kill this thing and take its head, and that is worth this much money. You can take X, Y, and Z feature off of it. It's worth this much. So there's like monster looting is a feature that's built into the stat block of the monster. So and that's every monster. So your players can ask at the end of every combat encounter, like what do we get? Like there is actually a built-in answer to like, what do we get? And it's like, well,
that makes it so much easier.
You harvest this thing from this monster, and it's like, well, that's what you get. You get this thing, and if you get back to a city where you can sell it, it's worth 300 silver or whatever. So there's like these bounties that are for monsters too, that it's like, this one is worth this much money if you go out and kill it. There's getting better or worse.
For the morale, is that a D20 roll?
It's a 2d6.
Okay.
Oh wait, is it 2d6? Or is it on there? let me flip over to the back of the book. It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 2d6, and you would be trying to. So like a goblin has a morale of 7. So if you roll 7 or higher, then it's demoralized.
Okay.
And then you would see if it like either flees or surrenders by rolling another d6. And it's
That's
like a 50-50 chance of like, oh, it's going to surrender and be like, I give up, or it's going to run away. Which I think, before I talk about like getting better, which is essentially leveling up in Mork Borg, because there is kind of leveling up, but it's not really leveling. I want to talk about like running away, because there are no opportunity attacks. So you can just run. And it is like one of the best things to do is just run away from an encounter. I generally would roll it as rolling an agility test to escape. I'd be like, just roll a d20 on your agility. If you roll 12 or better, generally, unless it's a super fast monster, but like if you roll 12 or better, you run away, you escape. And we would just pick up on like, okay, you ran this far and you got this far away from it. And that's how you can determine that. It's just, you ran away, the encounter's over, it's still out there, but like you got away. Or you failed to get away, and like if you fail that agility test, then I'd be like, okay, the monster gets to make another attack. And it gets to attack you, you roll defense, see if you survive or not, and then you can try and run away again. You can make another test to try and escape and see if you get away. If you fail, you suffer another potential attack, so on and so forth, until eventually you get away or you die. Or you could try to fight it, give up on running away because you keep on failing, and try and take a swing at it, see if you can kill it. But that is like a big part of combat as well, is I want to run away. I want to run away from this combat and survive. You can do that without having to play the game of like, oh, well, I move 30 feet. The monster moves up 30 feet. Okay, I disengage. I move another 30 feet. The monster runs up and you just play this weird game. And like, I know that there are rules for like escaping counters and running chases and stuff in other games. But I do think that it's a lot easier and simpler when you can just roll a single die and be like, you get away or you don't.
Because I think that is always a completely valid option in any game where you're going to be fighting something. I
Mhm.
think running away should be more accepted. Like,
Yeah,
because it feels like an encounter happens, you have to fight it to the death and see what happens. But sometimes running away is okay. Sometimes you don't
yeah,
want to die, especially
and
when you're trying to play heroes or something.
I think that a game, I do think that a game that discourages you from running away, if there are features in the game that discourage you from running away, then you're not going to run away very often,
Hmm.
right? Like it is encouraging you to fight by discouraging you from fleeing. And I
Hmm.
think that if you are not in a good condition, like you're trying to get back to town to sell your stuff, to buy, repair your armor, whatever, like, and you keep on bumping into random encounters, like you feel compelled in at not in every game, but I'll say at certain tables I have felt like I am compelled to fight the monster. Like I have to, because if I try to run, it's going to chase me and it's going to catch me. Like
Hmm.
no matter
And
what.
also,
I
other
can't.
people at the table might want to fight the monster as
Yeah.
well.
And it's like I
And
would love
so,
to just roll a d20, and if I roll high, I just get away. And I'm just
mhm.
gone. I'm just gone from the encounter. I'm just split. I go get a snack. I'm like, I'm not going to die here.
Mhm.
Um, but also, like, is the combat going to take 2 hours, or is it going to take 15 minutes after that? I guess that determines,
Exactly.
because I don't want to run away if it means I don't get to play for another 3 hours.
Yeah, but then that's just it. It's different environments for the game, different
Yeah,
environments,
yeah,
different expectations, different, choices that you're going to make because of how the mechanics are. But I just think it's incredibly interesting and super helpful to encourage the idea of running away because it's almost like in other games it feels like defeat or failure, but no, it's not. Sometimes you have to run away.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
okay.
100%. And not only is it okay, but I think that having systems or subsystems in your game or at your table that encourage the facilitation of fleeing from an encounter or of mitigating encounters in ways alternative to just fighting to the death. I think that is a good thing. I think that having those sorts of subsystems or encouraging uh, different resolutions to combat is a good thing. And I think that
Absolutely.
I think that there are games that do combat resolution better and some that do it worse. I think that Mork Borg is definitely a good one. It definitely has built-in features for combat resolution that involve the enemies surrendering, the enemies fleeing, you running away is always valid, and also like you could end this encounter by killing the thing instantly if you have the ability to do so, right? Like you could take the nuclear option and be like, I have one ability to instant kill this monster because I have a bomb. I'm gonna throw the bomb at it and I'm gonna end this because it's the end of my day and my character is very tired.
Exactly.
Um,
I like that they give that as well. You can control it gives the player more control in combat.
mhm,
It really does. And I like that a lot because I think as it's almost more fun to run, at least in my experience with D&D for sure. It's more fun for me to run combat than it is to participate in combat because I have
mhm,
elements I can control. I can make
mhm.
waves, I can make changes within the combat, and I feel like the players within certain systems don't have it's at least not I shouldn't say encouraged, but it's not talked about much.
I think that there's also this sort of like it's a little bit of a constriction of like rules, is that if there
Hmm.
are rules for a bunch of things and there aren't rules for something, it can almost confine your creativity in the fact that like
Hmm.
there are rules for so many bits of minutia in this game. So if there isn't a rule about it, I feel like I can't do it because there's a rule for so many things and there isn't a rule about this. So can I
Hmm.
do this?
Hmm.
And I think that there is definitely like a rule of cool like contingent of people that are like, oh, you can do whatever you want to do, and it's like, yeah, but there are also rules, right? Like there are rules in this game that we're playing. It's not Calvin Ball. So like you do want to have rules that are enforced in your game, and finding that line where it's like there are enough rules available to keep the game consistent and a game, but there aren't too many rules that you feel like you can't do something because there's no rule that defines it, right? Like you don't
Hmm.
want to be constricted by the fact that like there is no rule for covering somebody's mouth so they can't cast a spell. right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there isn't a rule for that, but like I feel like I should be able to do it, but like can I? I
Yeah,
think
because it doesn't specifically say. It's like, okay,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, nothing says that you can't do it, but nothing says that you can do it. And there's a lot of rules, so I feel like there should be a rule about this, but how are we going to handle it? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that more rules light systems tend to handle things often with like, does it make sense? If so, roll a 20-sided die or whatever, system they use to determine success or failure
Mm-hmm.
versus like a game that is more complicated will say, well, there isn't a rule for that, so you can't do it, or you shouldn't do it. Or you could
Mm-hmm.
use these rules that are similar to it, but it doesn't accomplish exactly what you're going for.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would wonder if a game that is like a little more crunchy has rules for like covering someone's mouth or not, right?
That would
Like it's like,
actually
is
be
that in
really
there? I'm like,
that would
that's going to be my litmus test for, is your game crunchy enough? Does it have rules for covering somebody's mouth with your hand? Does it say that you would prevent their casting if they need a verbal component?
that is hilarious, and I love that. So that's my criteria, you know.
That's my new rule. It's like, is your game really crunchy? Does it have rules for like poking someone's eye? I don't know. Does it? What if I just want to do that? I want to do a Three Stooges act. I just want to poke their eye. Yeah, so
I
things that
love
I
that.
haven't talked about are like there's powers, which is like spells in Mork
Mhm,
Borg. They're all scrolls. So like if you are familiar with like Elder Scrolls, it's basically like scrolls of power.
mhm.
And that's basically the way that powers work. So you would get to have like powers that are determined through like unclean or sacred scrolls, and you could use those a number of times equal to like a d4 plus your presence per day that you would determine in the morning.
Okay, yeah.
But anytime that you want to use a power, you are rolling a presence test, and the DR is 12. And if you succeed, then the power activates, and you subtract one from like your use total. And if you fail, then the power doesn't work, and you lose D2 hit points and become dizzy. So like
Ooh,
it's like
that's rough.
the powers are super unhinged though. Like they're
Mhm.
so like all over the place. Like one of them, the daemon of capillaries is an unclean
Interesting.
scroll that one creature suffocates for D6 rounds and loses a D4 of hit points per round. It's
Oh,
just like you're like Darth Vader choking them to death for like D6 rounds. So like that also, if they're choking to death, I'm assuming that they can't do very much. So I'm like, that is like
mhm.
an encounter ender right there. Um but there's also like the sacred scrolls have things that can just like give you a ton, like a D10 hit points for D2 creatures. So like one or two
Ooh,
creatures near you get back 1 D10 hit points. So like,
that's
oh,
fantastic.
there's also an unclean scroll of death.
Oh,
Like
of course, of course.
it just, it's terrible. All creatures within 30 feet of you lose 4 D10 hit points. It's like a bomb, right? Like it's just this field of death around you that kills anything. And the way you get scrolls can be determined sometimes through like when you're like through character creation might give you like a random chance of getting a scroll
Mhm.
through like items that you get on a random table. You might get a scroll and then roll on a table. It could also be like loot at the end of a dungeon might include an unclean or a clean scroll. Um, so yeah, and then it's like it's like essentially a D10 table for each of those two categories of what scroll do you get. Um, but
That is
yeah,
so amazing. I
yeah.
love that so much. It's a scroll of death.
Yeah, like that's what I mean by like there are some powers that are just so like they're so powerful that it's like, oh, there's a chance of it failing. That's why. Because like if you
Mhm.
burned an action trying to pop off the death scroll, like I still think that's a valid use of your turn to attempt it, right?
Uh-huh.
Like like there's also like if you roll like a nat 1 on your powers, I believe that is what triggers like arcane catastrophes.
Oh god.
Um yeah, like
Unsafe.
like you could trigger, I think it's up to the GM, like a lot of things are, of like you could trigger arcane catastrophes on a 1 and then do something else special on a nat 20, but they're not super defined. I know that there's like community content that has clarified this more if you're looking for like more defined rules on using powers. But like the arcane catastrophes are all sort of body horror type of things. One of them that I remember is like essentially like your skeleton becomes sentient and tries to kill you. Yeah, like there's some things
One of
in
those
that.
everyday occurrences.
Yeah. So it's like using, okay, you could use the power of a scroll and like get this amazing like one hit finisher, or you could end up like essentially killing your character with a nat 1. Um
I think the risk makes it so interesting though. Like it genuinely does, because it feels like, and like again, I don't prefer D&D as my like base system. I've enjoyed other systems more, but I don't like hate D&D or anything.
mhm.
But when it does come to like spellcasting in D&D, the worst that can happen from a like failed spell is you just use your spell slot. And that's it.
Yeah, there's definitely like I think that it might be like from a game design standpoint, it's from like the investment in character creation that it feels unsatisfying to lose a character or have serious negative consequences for something that feels like random nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Where like systems that are more prone to random nonsense, like Mork Borg, like other OSR games, they're more prone to random things happening that might kill your character. Like, I think that does lend itself to a spellcasting system like that. Like, I have, over the course of the years, experimented with lots of different spellcasting systems, like as patches for 5e or as like other systems that handle magic completely differently. And like my personal preference is a sort of like risk reward mechanic, but I do understand how you doing that in a system that wasn't built for it or with that intention just doesn't work. It's not
Absolutely.
satisfying. It feels a lot like it feels a lot more disappointing to fail than it does good to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
It essentially it has like trying to port something like a Mork Borg like power system into 5e would lead to people just not picking spellcasters because like it's like I don't want to blow up my character unless you have a lulz random person in your party who plays as like a wild magic sorcerer. Like it's only a particular person who's going to enjoy this, and forcing everybody to go along with it in a game that wasn't built for it is in my experience has not been good.
Oh yeah, definitely it would not be a good idea to port it over like that. But I
Yeah.
like the idea of more interesting, it doesn't even have to be consequences, but things
Mhm.
that can happen from failure.
Yeah.
I personally, I mean, I like Powered by the Apocalypse system. I've played, I haven't played a ton of Monster of the Week, but that's my like other campaign that I've been running.
Mhm.
And I love the fact that failure in that game, first of all, makes something happen. Something's always going to happen in the game. Does not matter what. If you fail, something is going to happen. Usually bad, but doesn't always have to be. um, and you also get experience points from failure. And
Mhm.
I think it makes it so that because the failure within D&D with spell casting, you don't cast the spell, you took your entire turn to do that.
Mhm.
Other people sometimes will have, especially like melee classes, can have several attacks, things like that. Spellcasters are a little harder to always have a ton of different things that you can do in a round because you have the big, powerful magic. And yeah, it's big and powerful. And I guess, like, the consequence of it not working, it's not even a consequence because everything's up to chance.
Yeah.
It's almost kind of, it's rough for the consequence to be the spell just doesn't do anything, because
Yeah.
that's that was completely up to chance. You can't always control that.
Yeah, which I think also it does also kind of go into the fact of like how paced is your game. Like, is a
Mhm.
round of combat, is failing at a turn, like getting nothing out of your turn, is that a huge disappointment? How much time passed between your first turn and your second turn?
Exactly.
Like
If there are 10 minutes between each turn, it's gonna feel worse than if it's like I just had a turn a minute ago and now it's mine again. Like
exactly, yeah.
going back
Like the pace of the game makes such a huge impact into how you feel about failure. Because yes, in Mork Borg you're always one roll away from death. Yeah, whatever. But like the amount of turns that you get in a single combat like are in the double digits potentially. Like things can go so fast in my experience with it, especially if you're fighting like a big boss monster like a troll. Like combat can take 10 rounds, but you've spent 25 minutes. Like it can go lightning quick, but that's because the number of things that you do on a turn is one, and the troll does one thing on its turn as well. Like, you know, how long are you going to really take to think about this? Like your main thoughts are, do I attack it or do I run? Like there's and if there's a specific thing to the scenario, like, oh, I'm trying to also like, you know, unlock this vault of prisoners to, you know, free them from whatever. Like if you have additional objectives, then like using your turn to attempt to unlock a door can feel like a valid choice while your team fights the monster, because like it'll be your turn again soon. And it's like, oh, I failed to unlock the door. Well, next turn I'm going to do the same thing and attempt to unlock the door again. And that doesn't feel like a waste.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't feel like a waste.
Yeah, it's like in a 5e game or a game where turns are longer, because I don't want to just single out 5e in particular, but it is a good monolith to point to. But like if I had to unlock a door and it was going to cost me my action, I need to make sure that I have a bonus action that I can do as well, or that unlocking the door takes my bonus. Like I want to optimize my turn because I might not get another one for a few minutes. Even in a fast-paced 5e game, or a lower level game, like you're still going to be considering that of like how much can I squeeze out of my turn, because I may not get one in a few minutes, especially if there's, you know, somebody who has very long turns in your group, or there's a lot of monsters and the DM has to fumble to deal with, like, you know, I have like 8 monsters to control. That's a lot. So all these little things that just add on more time, and it's like, well, then when it is my time to shine, I want to make sure I get a lot out of it. Where it's like in Mork Borg, I don't care if I fail because I'll get another turn in like 2 minutes. It'll be fine.
Exactly, and it just makes it, at least for me, it makes failing in those moments in like a more so D&D longer time between turns system. It makes it so. It just makes failure so defeating. It really does.
Oh yeah, like I think a good example of that is in Descent into Avernus, which is a module for 5e that takes you through like the 9 hells and whatever. It's designed to be a game that is it's supposed to sort of have that like, well, that it's Baldur's Gate vibe, and it's supposed to be a little bit of like Mad Max type of thing, because like the 9 hells are sort of like this like post-apocalyptic vibe to them, and so the game is designed to give you additional things to make it feel more depressing, I guess. And so they're like, oh, if anyone rolls a nat 1 in the 9 hells, break their weapon. And I'm like, that punishes martial characters so much more, because like your wizard isn't going to explode on a nat 1, but your marshal's going to break their weapon. Like that in 5e feels like such a big deal, where like if in Mork Borg, like if your wizard rolls a 1, they explode. And if you roll a nat 1, you break your weapon. Like the wizard is actually worse off. Like in this scenario, like, you know,
exploding is a little worse. Good point.
Yeah. So like, but it's more of equal footing. But that's because like you know, greater rewards, greater risk, and all of that. Like the worst thing you're risking as a martial character in Mork Borg is breaking your sword. But you know, the worst thing that you're it's just it creates its own balance almost out of like, if everybody can succeed and everybody can fail on equal terms, then it feels fine. But when you're like punishing particular actions with failure and other actions are so much more optimal, it encourages you to pick the optimal choices so you don't feel like you've wasted your time.
Exactly. And that's, I think, where it can feel with even this is specific becoming more of a game design discussion or something like that versus Mork Borg.
Sorry, it's kind of how
oh no, you're perfect. What was I just about to say? Where it comes to even choosing abilities and subclasses in like D&D, you want to pick the one that's going to be the most optimized, which is usually going to be gives you enough, like it gives you reactions, bonus actions, and also deals a lot of damage, because those are the main objectives in D&D. Like those are the things that you want to be good at. Those are what you're going to be less disappointed in.
The thing that will protect your party the most isn't healing, it's killing the monster. Like it's like you want to kill the monster as fast as possible. The only alternatives to damage is control, like something that stops the enemy from doing anything or paralyzes them, right? Like something that affects them in a way that makes them die faster. Like that's the primary goal. So like, yeah, if you had to roll to cast spells I'm not perfect. I've run games where like you've had to roll to cast spells, and 0 out of 10 would not recommend. For like 5e, I don't think it's a good idea. I've tried a few different versions of it. I've tried versions that I've found online that seemed to have pretty good reviews from people, and even those, I was like, this is less fun than just not doing this.
Not my style.
yeah, it's like, because it ends up just flipping it, where it's like, oh, now spellcasting is a suboptimal choice, so people just don't want to do it, because like now they're potentially wasting their turn, where the martial class is never wasting their turn, because they get to just wacky
for no reason.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not evenly distributed. Which I think is like the biggest thing, is like it's not evenly distributed suboptimal choices, or like equally distributed suffering, right? Like if we're suffering, we need to suffer together, and I think that Mork Borg does a good job of that, because like we all are a die roll away from doom. Although we're having a terrible time. One thing that we're having a terrible time, but it's so much fun. But one thing that might save you from that death is an omen, the next thing on your character sheet I forgot to mention. We got there.
Great segue. Love it.
Yeah, we got there. An omen is a like power that every player character has. You as the what was it? The name of the class? It was called the
Occult Herb Master, yeah.
An Occult Herb Master gets D2 omens every time that you wake up from sleep. So you would start off your day with D2 omens, and you can spend an omen, and these are conveniently like just listed at the bottom of the character sheet. You can either max out your damage, re-roll a die roll, minus a D6 of damage to you, minus an ability check, basically a die roll by 4, or you can nullify a crit or a fumble. So like if you fumble your defense roll, you can spend an omen and be like, no, that didn't happen. I would like to nullify that. Or, I took 12 damage. I would like to minus D6 from that. It's another thing that you get to do reactively to stuff that's happened. Or like, I want to roll to attack. You roll and it's a nat 1. You're like, I would like to re-roll that and spend an omen. And then you can just roll it again, sort of like having advantage. Yeah, or you could just max out a hit. Like if you're that one in particular is absolutely insane if you have a Zweihander, which is like the two-handed sword. It's a great sword essentially in Mork Borg, and it does a D10. So you can just do a flat 10 damage by spending an omen and be like, "Oh, I hit it. I would like to maximize my damage and do 10 damage." Yeah, so like there's stuff like that where it's like I'm just gonna do that, and it's like, oh, you have 2 omens for the day, then you can do that twice. Yeah, so there's stuff like that where it's like this is a way that you can also preserve your character. Like if you save your omens, you can use them to like re-roll. The re-roll is not only your die, it's also somebody else's. So like you can do that to save somebody else as well. And the way that this works is essentially it's like they're omens, right? Like these are things that are either, you could call them luck or you could call it fate. It's essentially your control over your own destiny in these small ways are your omens. So that's another thing that can keep you alive. I think that's basically the last thing like oh, I never talked about getting better. Getting better or worse, because leveling can make you worse.
Oh my
In
god.
Mork Borg.
Of course it does.
It essentially works through like what is it called? What is like it called in 5e? Where you level based on like narrative points.
Oh,
Like
milestone?
milestone. That's right. That's right. Milestone leveling. Yeah, I was like, I wanted to call it capstone leveling. I was like, that's wrong. But yeah, milestone leveling, because your game master decides when you all like improve. And it could be like they suggest either like after completing a scenario, like finishing a dungeon or killing like a big monster at whatever like big point in the game happens. The big thing of importance happens. You can either get better or worse after. And essentially, you would roll 6d10s, and if the results are equal to or higher than your current hit point maximum, if the result is equal to or greater than your hit point maximum, then you would increase your hit points by a d6.
6d10s?
Yes. So essentially, as long as you end up with, if you play Mork Borg for a long term game, and your character doesn't die, they will continue to gain hit points until they hit about 30 hit points.
That's pretty solid.
Because around that point, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to like you could roll higher than that, right? Like you could roll up to 60 on 60-10, but it's just the average is going to be like 30 something, and so that's about where your hit points are going to end up capping. And I think that's a fun way to up your hit points, and it lets you roll a bunch of d10s every now and again.
Yeah. Makes it fun. Like that's a fun level up process. Like, all right, everyone, let's roll our d10s. It's almost like I can imagine around a table it can kind of be like a ritual type thing.
Yeah,
where it's like here's a big bowl. Big bowl of d10s, slowly bring it around the table. I love
that sounds a lot of fun. Yeah, and leveling up with that, I haven't ever gotten to the point where that capped out, where people were like, oh, I'm not gaining any hit points. You also left in the debris, you find a d6 of things. It's either nothing, some silver, or you could end up getting lucky and get one of those clean or unclean scrolls.
Ooh, hell yeah.
And then you can prepare to use that scroll however many times in a day. And then you also get your ability changes, which is you roll a d6 against your ability. And if the result is equal to or greater than the ability, you increase it by 1 to a maximum of +6. And if the result is below, you decrease it by 1. So like if you were you would roll against
yeah. So it's like, okay, so stats are always going to be changing. Like you are never going to be I really like that actually. That keeps it interesting.
Yeah, it actually, when in the last time that I did a getting better or worse, one of my player characters, like they lost some strength. They were super bitter about it. Because they went from a 3 to a 2, because like, I mean, they rolled like a 1 on their d6 for that, and so they dropped by 1. And that's a shame if your whole character is built around strength, but it does keep things dynamic and changing. There is, however, like an asterisk on that. If your ability score is -3 to +1, you always gain 1. So
nice.
you're not gonna drop into the negative. If anything, this kind of enforces like normality over time, because like you're gonna end up with like average to above average stats over time, over a long enough period of time, because like eventually the average, right, like the average of a d6 is like 3.5. So in theory, you'll end up inevitably with a +3 to every stat. It just might be super swingy and weird to get there. But in all likelihood, like, I mean, if you rolled a d6 right now against your +3, which I think was presence, right? Like, just roll a d6 and we'll see if it went up or down.
That's a 6.
So that would go up. So then you have a +4, which in Mork Borg terms is insane. Like, that is such a huge buff to be like +4, because like you need to roll a 12 to use your like an unclean scroll, right? So now your average is like,
casually let me roll a d20 here. Well, okay. I mean, that's a 7, but
Yeah, so that's a failure, but not by much. And so like you
Yeah.
only need to roll an 8 or better to succeed.
Hmm.
Like that's crazy. That's crazy good.
Just ups your chance even more and more.
Yeah, yeah, and these tiny little upgrades, like seemingly small like number changes because of the way that D20s work, like it is a every plus one you get is 5% more improvement, right? Like
Hmm.
it's a good chunk of betterment. But yeah, that
Absolutely.
is everything about your Merkborg character. There are all of these classes. There are additional classes available on the Merkborg site. Scumbirther has a bunch of stuff in it that is not in the base book that is also available for free. There's so many community created classes because a class is like 5 things. Um, like it's
Super
essentially
easy.
it's like 2 tables and a couple pluses and minuses.
Mhm.
Um, and just a whole lot of vibes. Like I think that the cover of Merkborg is it might be a little scary. It might seem really intense, but the game itself is a lot. The game itself plays a lot more like a comedy than the
Mhm.
cover would imply. Like provided that you embrace the chaos and the grimdark nature of it, you play characters that are suitable for that sort of like dark and wicked like world that they live in. As long as you play people that are as awful and broken scum as the book intends, it's a really funny game to play.
Absolutely. And I think as much as I still think I have more questions and things I would love to keep hearing you talk about. I think we're getting pretty
Yeah, no, it's
pretty
been like
much to the end of the
4 hours or whatever,
recording.
3 hours.
Minor details, but like this has seriously been amazing. I would love, I think, because I know there's other hacks of Morkborg, such as Cyborg and Pirate Borg
Oh
and
yeah,
stuff like
and I
that.
have Cyborg. I don't have Pirate Borg on my shelf yet, but
Yeah.
I have 2 copies of Cyborg. Um, yeah, and that is an amazing expansion because like Cyberpunk is a really good subject for a game like Merkborg because it
Mhm.
also is a sort of like Cyberpunk has the potential to do Grimdark very very well as well, to have a sort of like technocratic society that is beyond saving, and Cyborg takes that all the way of like this is like corporate overlords using people for wars, but like everything's been so awful so long. It's everybody's a criminal and on some level.
Exactly.
And so Cyborg definitely takes that sort of dystopia in a very cool way. It's a bigger book than Merkborg is. It has additional rules in it that are just like so mind-blowingly clever. I think I'm only going to mention one, but it's just in Cyborg, like ammunition is tracked by when you like roll a 1 on the d6, you're out of ammo.
Ooh.
Like you run out of ammo, you don't know when.
Oh, okay,
Like
but I like that better than trying to actually keep I am so I shouldn't say annoyed. It's always like I don't like keeping track of ammo in game, like
it's a
either
lot of
ammo or arrows, stuff like that. It's like,
yeah, it's like isn't it neat that just like I just have bullets until I run out. And it's almost like more like it's more narratively like dynamic. It's just
mhm.
oh, and then I ran out of ammo. Or oh,
Yeah,
and
and
then
it
my
does
gun
make you
jammed.
think twice of like, should I actually shoot this or not? I need to make sure I keep all my ammo. It like just
Yeah.
makes you live in the moment.
Yeah, like you don't know when you'll run out of ammo. It could happen at any time. It's super fun. It's got a lot of things in it. It's also a beautiful book, just like Merkborg, and they
Mhm.
put a ton of effort into it. I was super thrilled to be a part of that Kickstarter for Cyborg because they blew their like previous numbers out of the water. If I this I'm gonna have my numbers wrong here, but somebody can fact check me. They I remember that looking up like the original like Merkborg like the original Kickstarter for Merkborg, and it was something like $9,000 or something,
Oh wow.
and then like the like 30,000 plus as it kept on getting higher and higher for Cyborg. I'm so happy that there are so many cult members of the Morkborg
Yeah.
cult who have become so invested in this, and I will continue to sort of proselytize and buy the books for people and be like, hey, you should look at this game. It is awesome. Because I think that you can definitely do a lot with the game part of it that I am so obsessed with, and you can make so many ports and versions of that as an approachable standard to modern RPGs. I think Mork Borg is good for the tabletop RPG space and could definitely be used as like a standard for what tabletop games should be functionally, because it is just a master class in game design. The more that you pick it apart, the more you're like, oh my god, this is so well thought out. Yeah, it's amazing, and I would encourage anybody to check it out and really dive into the system, even if the setting itself isn't your vibe, because like the system itself is just so good.
Yeah, especially since there are other there is Pirate Borg and Cyborg. Even if you don't like just that, if you don't like the Merc Borg system, or not system but setting, there are other options. Even just like fan made stuff alone.
Yeah.
So much is out there. So like if you like the system and how the system sounds to play, there are other options. You can absolutely explore it. And even just reading through the book and then just taking that and bringing it into whatever you want to create also works perfectly.
yeah. There's so much cool stuff just from the vibe of it, and a lot of creative ideas, even in the monster section, which I know everybody loves buying monster books. I think pretty much ubiquitously, like, like if we can agree on one thing as a community, it's we like books full of stat blocks. And just looking through stat blocks. I mean, I have a book for a system that I've never played, called, I think it's Hackmaster. And I just have their like monster manual. I don't play the game. I don't,
just because it's cool.
Yeah, it's a book that has like a scale textured cover, and it just has a bunch of monsters in it. And I don't play the system, don't intend to, but I just really like the layout of it. I'm like, all these monsters look super cool, and it has like all this like ecology information of like, where does this monster live? How would you track it and stuff? And I'm like, this is amazing. And I don't play the game. I just bought the monster manual.
It's just mine.
Yeah, it looks nice on the shelf. I mean,
oh yeah, but that's my favorite thing. Like, I know that I'm probably never going to play every single game on my shelf, but oh boy, do I love having them all up there. It's like, oh, isn't that so pretty?
yeah, no, full bookshelf, full books next to me right now. I'm like 100%. I feel that. I want my bookshelf to look like a game store. It's just, just pick something off of the shelf and see what it is that you like about it. Yeah, no,
exactly.
There's way too much money on this shelf. I have a problem. Somebody help. And the bright yellow books on the bottom are Mork Borg.
And there is a good sizable chunk of that.
Yeah, they stand out super harsh on any shelf. So you know when they're there. You're like, oh, that there's Mork Borg.
I've got my eye on you. But yeah, absolutely. I think before I know that's probably going to happen, get sidetracked with talking about more. I think this is a good stopping point for today's episode. Unless you have any like what's your final message to people after listening to everything that just happened, listening to all of the ranting and raving about Mork Borg? What is the final message to people about to play this game?
The book is like $20. It's not that expensive. You should play the game. I guess that's really what it is that the game is a lot of fun. I think it's worth trying out. Kill some characters. It'll be fun.
Kill some characters, kill some monster. One monster, only one. Kill some characters, kill some monsters, and have fun.
yeah. I think it's just embrace the vibe of it and just have fun, because it is a really really well put together game. And
consider it for. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Consider it for like good games, as like, let's say you're playing a full campaign and you're like, oh man, I just don't want to run. I'm not ready for this week or anything like that. Consider Mork Borg as a great option to just like, let's do a one shot. Let's 100%. Have a side. Yeah,
1000%. I think that is the best possible intro to Mork Borg, is just run a one shot in it. And
Mhm.
if it's not like if it's not your speed, like it was just one shot, and if it is, like you could end up making that into like a 2-shot, a 3-shot, a 4-shot, and then before
Exactly.
you know
Played
it,
it
you're
for
just
as
playing
much as
like
you want.
you're just playing a running game. Yeah, try out a one shot. Honestly, I would just say that about any system. Like you should
Yeah, same.
try a one shot in any system that interests you. Anything that you
Uh-huh.
look at and you're like, this vaguely interests me, you should try it in a one shot. And you will find that there are some games that are absolutely just not your speed, or the way that the rules are put together just aren't for you or aren't for your table. But you will encounter some that absolutely are, and that is worth that is worth it just for those great times that you can have. And I think just approaching your group with like I would like to like play a one shot in this thing. It doesn't have to be a forever thing, but I want us to like try to learn this in like an afternoon. And if you
Mhm.
can't learn the game like in a few hours trying to play it, maybe that's just not the game, right? Like maybe that game is a little bit too much, or you need like somebody experienced to come with it. But I think that there's a lot of games that you can just learn by just let's pick it up and play a one shot, the same way that you would learn like how to play a board game. It's like
Absolutely.
let's give this a shot.
Perfect. I think that's that right there. Just try it in a one shot.
Mhm.
That is the takeaway. But yes, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Mork Borg. This has been absolutely amazing. I'm going to run it now. That's a fact. I've been wanting to run more one shots in general. That is going to be the next one. I'm saying it right now. Mork Borg is going to be
Awesome.
the next one, and it's honestly completely because like you have 100% sold me on it. I need to play it at this point. So thank you
It's so
so
fun.
much for coming on and
It's
talking
my
about it.
pleasure. It's my pleasure, and I will continue to proselytize the Merkborg cult. Uh,
As you should.
yeah.
But yes, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Yeah, thank you again, Zakariah, for coming on. This was awesome. So yeah, that's the end. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the RPG Goblin. It really means the world to me. I really hope that you enjoyed it. And this is the first two-part saga that we have done on this podcast so far. So I really hope that you enjoyed that. But yes, thank you again to Zakariah for coming on and talking about Mork Borg with me. It was such a fantastic time. I really hope to have Zakariah on again to talk about even more games. But for now, if you want to see what Zakariah does and consume some content that he makes, then you should check him out on DMsGuild, where he actually makes content for D&D 5th edition. Spells and alternate rule sets and things like that. It's really, really awesome and really good. It's usually pay what you want. So if you're on a budget and you're looking for really awesome D&D content to use for your own personal games, please check him out. You can find him on DM's Guild by just searching Zakariah. His name and how you spell it will be in the description below. But please check him out and all of the awesome content that he makes. Now, if you want to support the RPG Goblin, I would really, really appreciate that since it helps keep this podcast going. I've only been doing this for a few months, but I've been having an absolute blast, and every little bit of support, whether it be rating this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcast, whatever, following the RPG Goblin on any of our social medias, such as Twitter and Instagram and even YouTube, really means the world to me and helps keep this podcast actually going. So if you have enjoyed the RPG Goblin so far, please consider, supporting us any way that you can. The next episode of the RPG Goblin will be coming out May 26th, and oh, I am so excited, as we are going to be talking about a game called Cybertopia. And what's going to be really special about this episode is I actually have the person who designed the game to talk about it with me, Ben, and he is absolutely fantastic. This was a blast of an episode to record. I can't wait to share it with everyone. And Cybertopia is a really interesting game where it's a simplified sci-fi, has this really flexible character creation where you can play anything that you want within this game, where you go on these mission-based adventures and just have an absolute blast. So please check that out next week if that game sounds really, really interesting to you. But I think that is the end. So again, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week.